Office working with the Immigration Advising team, and welcome to today's session on International Student Information Session on Immigration. If you're attending this session, you are most likely a new student who will be starting your university journey in spring 2024. I will just see. So welcome. So what we request at this time that because it will be a presentation session that you keep yourself muted until you are invited to unmute yourself. So welcome to today's session. Really excited to have you all joining and talking about very important aspects of your immigration journey in Canada. So next slide, please. But before I start, I want to start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on the lands where you are located and the Indigenous people for whom these lands are traditional territory. Now, you must be wondering, what is this land acknowledgement unless you have attended our sessions previously or other sessions where it has explained to you what this land acknowledgement is. So this land acknowledgement is a tradition that precedes the European colonization of Canada, where the Indigenous people, whenever they came to other people's land, they made the land acknowledgement and explained that they are the visitor in this land. But since then, the colonization has happened. Canada has a dark history of ecocide, genocide, and epistemicide of Indigenous peoples. But Canada as a society is also trying to have a reconciliation process where settlers and Indigenous understand each other better in terms of the ongoing colonial violence that's taking place. As part of that, many institutions and organizations and individuals started their sessions, events, programmings, or any public gathering with a land acknowledgement. If you are in Memorial, you will have a lot of chance to get to know about the Indigenous cultures and histories through courses, but we also have a wonderful Indigenous Student Resource Center where you can also go and learn about the indigenization, what does it means, and what role you have to play in terms of reconciliation. Second slide, please. I will also like to do an ancestral honoring and labor acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the labor theft extracted from people of African descent and used to build European wealth and economies globally and in the Canadian nation state, including Newfoundland and Labrador's shipbuilding and cod fishery industries, through the violence of transatlantic enslavement. It is important that we recognize the harm that has been perpetuated against the people of African descent. And as we go through that process of recognition, it's also important that to recognize there is racism in our society. If you ever sense or feel racism or discrimination at any form or shape, I want you to know that Internationalization Office is here to listen to you and help you to navigate those things. So if you ever sense any of that, please come and speak to one of the immigration advisors at the Internationalization Office, and we will be able to help you with that. Next slide, please. So again, before we begin, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please save your question until after the presentation. Keep your camera and mic muted because we are recording it. Once you're invited to unmute yourself, you are more than welcome to unmute yourself. Next slide, please. So now see these wonderful human beings there in the slide. This is Arif, of course. Again, my name is Arif. I am a regulated international student immigration advisor. I am an uninvited racialist settler here in the ancestral homeland of Mi'kmaq and Betok, and I use he, they pronouns. And I will pass it to my colleague, Panis Sarimi.
Thank you so much, Arif, and hello everyone. Welcome. You guys are all ahead of other students that unfortunately didn't get a chance to attend. My name is Panis, and I work at the International Relation Office. I am also a regulated international student immigration advisor. What that means is that I'm able to help with your temporary status as a student in Canada. Anything that relates to student status, such as visa, study permit, co-work permit, postgrad work permit, and my pronouns are she, her. I will pass it to Natasha.
All right, thank you. And so I'm Natasha Clark, also a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, part of this wonderful team of immigration advisors who are here now at the beginning of your journey and throughout your studies at Memorial to help answer your questions and make sure you understand the immigration regulations that impact you as an international student, which of course is the entire purpose of today's session. So we hope that you learn some things, that you get to meet us and you're comfortable in connecting with us, as time is needed throughout your studies. I would also like to recognize that I'm an uninvited settler in the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and my pronouns are she and her. So I look forward to connecting with you throughout your studies.
Thank you, Natasha. Next slide, please. So Natasha and Panis really told you exactly what we are going to talk today. But what is our hope is that, by listening to this session and asking us question, you will be able to distinguish between what's the difference between visa, ETA, and study permit, and importance of a passport. You'll be able to describe how the enrollment status, which means like the number of courses that you take, impacts your eligibility to work and study. You will be able to define key memorial terms for immigration purposes. You will be able to describe what are the requirements to be able to get co-op work permit. You'll be able to describe the post-graduation work permit eligibility requirement. You'll be able to identify at least 3 sources of finding information related to immigration. And you will be able to navigate the immigration support for international students in Brightspace, like how do you navigate that, and identify at least one way to connect with one of us. So we will be discussing that as well. So with that, I pass it on the torch to Natasha Clark.
Okay. Is really designed for students who are starting their studies at Memorial in our spring 2024 semester, which will be starting in May. So I understand, that some students may already have arrived in Canada and some of you may not have arrived in Canada yet. You might be outside of Canada. So I think it would be helpful just to hear, and you can just type it kind of quickly into the chat, if there's anybody joining us from within Canada, or you can raise your hand. All right, so I guess that would make me assume that others are joining us from outside of Canada and have a plan to come to Canada over the coming month to begin their studies in the spring semester. If that's not the case, that's not your situation, let us know. You can, send us a private chat message if you want. It's just helpful to understand those in our audience so we know where you're at, right, in terms of your immigration journey and joining us as a student in the spring semester. So what we want to do is kind of go over those important documents that are relevant to your immigration status in Canada. And the very first one is not a Canadian document at all. It's your passport, right? So the passport that you have issued from your home country's government that was needed in order for you to apply for your study permit, and is also required in order for you to travel, right? And travel to Canada. So Many students will have a passport that will be valid for 5 years, maybe 10 years. It may cover the duration of their stay while they're here in Canada. Other students will sometimes have a passport that may be expiring while they're in Canada. So I would presume at this point your passport is valid, right? It's valid for you to travel and to come to Canada. But at some point over your studies while you're here, it may expire. And if it is set to expire while you're still a student here at Memorial, you want to ensure that you take the necessary steps to extend and get that new passport in advance of it expiring. Now, this is not an area that we can provide direct assistance with because, again, it's not a Canadian document, and every country's government will have different regulations and processes to follow in order to get a new passport. Your country may have a representative in Canada in the form of a high commission, embassy, or consulate, and they would be here in Canada to serve you as a national of that country, and will have services they can provide as it relates to passport renewals or extensions. So that may be your first point of contact to get information from them. Some countries will allow you to begin the application a year or so in advance, some only several months in advance. Some will allow you to be here in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and you may have to courier and send documents to the country's representative, which would be likely in another province in Canada, likely in Ontario, near our nation's capital in Ottawa. And some will require that you have to travel in person. So you may have to travel within Canada to go to your country's representative to go through the process of the passport. So it can vary, but obviously it's a very important document and one you want to connect with your home country's government about in terms of the process to follow to extend it if it's going to be expiring while you're in Canada. And that's because, your Canadian immigration documents will be based on your passport. So, nothing that you have for Canada is going to be issued beyond your passport validity. So this here is a Canadian document that should be affixed inside your passport. Okay, and this is called a temporary resident visa or an entry visa, right, is what we call it. So this is required in order to seek entry to Canada if you are from what's called a visa requiring country. There are some countries that are not visa requiring, but would require something in the absence of a visa called an electronic travel authorization, or ETA. We can't show you an ETA because it's not a physical document. It is electronically linked to your passport. So a visa or an ETA is not something you would have had to apply for separately, right? If you have applied for a study permit to come to Canada, if that study permit is to be approved, you will be issued a visa if you're from a visa requiring country, or you will be issued an ETA if you're from a non-visa requiring country. Our students from the United States will require neither. Okay, so it's not something you make a separate application for, but if your study permit is set to be approved, then you will get a request to submit your passport so that this visa can be affixed in it. And the validity of the visa is listed there. So it will have a date that it is issued, and it will have a date that it's set to expire, and it will identify the number of entries that you can take. Most visas are multiple entry, which means you can use this document to seek entry on limited times during the time that it is valid, so before its expiry date. And typically that expiry date will be valid based on the length of your program. So if you are coming for a 1-year program, that will likely expire in a year from now. If it's a 2-year program, 2 years, 4-year program, 4 years, and so on. Unless, of course, your passport is set to expire before the estimated end of your program, at which point it would only go to your passport. So the visa is given to you as part of your study permit application, because if you're approved for the study permit, you need that visa to then travel to Canada and seek entry and to be issued your study permit. Now, once you are in Canada, the visa, doesn't really have a purpose, right? It just allows you to seek entry to Canada. It's your study permit that serves the purpose of being your status document and allows you to be in Canada and to study and to possibly work, which we'll talk about later on. So once you're here, it's okay to be in Canada on an expired visa so long as you maintain a valid study permit. Now, if while you're in Canada, you want to travel, so you might take a trip back home or you might travel to throughout your studies, you will need to ensure that you have a valid visa to return to Canada. So there is a process once you're in Canada to apply for a new visa in the case where the one you have, has expired or will expire soon, and you want to have a valid one in case you will travel and leave. A visa would be required to seek entry to Canada in pretty much every scenario except for one. There is an exception. So if you're in Canada on a valid study permit, you are in Canada and then make a trip from Canada to the United States, and then you come directly back to Canada from the United States. You don't go to a third country in between. You actually don't need a valid visa to re-enter Canada from a visit only to the US, as long as you have a valid study permit. All right, so now we're going to test your knowledge of what we've talked about so far.
Aha! Now we are going to see if you were really paying attention to Natasha Clark or not. Okay. Joking aside, it's a simple true and false questions. What will happen? I will read out a statement, and you have to tell me if it is true or false. And you will do that by putting that in the chat box. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, we do it in a FIFA style. So I will say that, and you will have to say true and false. In the bracket, you have to write the name of your country. The person who answers the first and correctly gets the goal for their country. So it's also not only whether you're paying attention to Natasha Clark, it's also winning the trophy for the country. And what is the award? The award is, I will make you all coffee when you come to internationalization office for the winners. Now, so firstly I start. Something is coming on my screen. I'm not sure why. Is it happening to you as well, Natasha?
Yeah.
Mine too.
Okay. So I am going to
Is
try
it
to read.
gone?
Okay,
Yeah, it's gone.
it's gone now. It's gone now. Okay. Sorry about that. What is that? What was that? Whatever it was. Sorry about that. So I'm going to read out the sentence. Visa is an official counterfoil document issued by a visa office abroad that is placed in a person's passport to show that he or she has met the requirements for admission to take Canada as a temporary resident, visitor, student, and or worker. True or false? Yeah, I mean, Emmanuel, you are from Ghana, but what is it, true or false? True. Letitia, what is your country? Sanal, true, and Sri Lanka. Yes, it is true, and the correct answer came from Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka, 1, and everybody else is 0. Okay, Sanal, good job. So you have to give the answer, and in the bracket, you have to tell your country. Okay. So next one, you can enter Canada with an expired TRV. True or false? Yes, it is false. You cannot enter Canada with an expired TRV. It is so this one goes to Nigeria. So Nigeria 1, Sri Lanka 1. Okay, people are still trying. Okay, next one. Visa authorizes international students to work on or off campus. True or false? False, and it is false. It is not the visa that does it. It is your study permit that will do it. So now we got 1 goal for Sri Lanka, 1 goal for Nigeria, and 1 goal for Ghana. And finally, visa can be renewed from within Canada. True or false? True. Yes, it's correct. Visa can be renewed from within Canada. So Nigeria 2, Sri Lanka 1, and Ghana 1. That is the score we are keeping. Okay.
All right, we will have more chances. But now we're going to move on to talk about your study permit. So this is what a study permit looks like. Now, as I understand, many of you are joining us from outside of Canada. So you've not traveled yet to Canada, which means you don't yet have your study permit. So when you apply for your study permit, the officer will review your application, will make a decision. And if they're, again, likely to approve it, you'll get that request to submit your passport. You'll then receive the visa. And then typically shortly after getting that visa, if you're from a visa requiring country, you will receive what is called a letter of introduction, or an LOI, which is essentially a letter approving your study permit. So it's a letter that says this approves your study permit. Present this letter at the port of entry when you seek entry to Canada. And your LOI will have an expiry date as well. So in order to be issued your study permit, you have to seek entry to Canada before your approval letter or your LOI is set to expire. And if you required a medical exam as part of your study permit application, that LOI will also indicate what the expiry date is of that medical. So if you are seeking to enter Canada after your medical has expired, you won't be able to do that. You have to undergo a new medical and get that approved by IRCC first. So it's important to look at your LOI, read through it, and make note of the expiry date of the LOI, but also the expiry date of your medical exam if you had required one. So once you then make your plans and you travel to Canada, you're not likely to be flying into St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador directly, although it is an international airport. It's just a smaller airport where there's not many international flights. So the majority of the international flights coming into Canada will go to Canada's larger major airports. So you will likely either fly into Toronto or Montreal airport at first. And it's there where you will go through kind of the immigration checkpoint or the borders and customs checkpoint. And it is there where you meet with a border officer, where you would present your LOI. And that border officer may have additional questions for you, just wanting to verify your admission letter. So you should have that with you. They might want to just confirm, your financial support and kind of all those things that the visa officer would have looked at as part of your application. And then, provided you're good to go, they will issue you your study permit at the port of entry. So that's your first Canadian port of entry. So they're going to print the document, and this is essentially what it will look like. So we'll have your personal details on it. It will have a date of issue, which is the date it's printed when you land, and it will have an expiry date, which is really helped to be determined by the visa officer who processed your application. And it will also have a list of conditions or remarks. So it's very important, that you review your study permit, and we would certainly recommend that you have a look at it there in the airport before you leave that immigration, and customs area, just to ensure that things are correct. The name is correct, your date of birth is correct. You also would like to ensure that there's a condition, if you're eligible, which we'll talk about, to authorize you to work on or off campus if eligible. And if you notice any mistakes and there's the opportunity, because you're still there in the airport, then you can point those out and make a request. And if the officer is able to, at the port of entry, make adjustments, they will. There could be times where they're not able to do that, okay? So we do recommend you review your study permit very carefully before you leave the airport. And then, of course, afterwards, it's really important to know that expiry date. So, you're prepared if you don't complete your studies in time to be able to extend your study permit. And it's also really important to read the conditions and have a good understanding of what they mean. And so we will kind of go over that in a little bit more detail shortly, but first we'll have another quick quiz.
Thank you. So, again, remember, I will read a sentence. You will then say true or false and put in bracket. Now, one thing to note, that if you answer before I finish, I will give you a yellow card. Okay, so so don't answer before I finish. So here it goes. Study permit allows you to enter Canada. True or false? True, true, wrong, 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 true, wrong, true, false. Ghana, Ghana too. Yeah, study permit is not a travel document. Study permit authorizes you to study in Canada. It is your visa and ETA. That is your travel document. That allows you to enter Canada, right? So Ghana got one more. Ghana two. Ghana is doing well. I have a separate question for Ghanaian and Nigerians is that, who makes the best jollof rice? But that is for another day. Second question, second question, study permit authorizes you to work if you meet the condition. Is it true or false? Uh, True. Who said the true first? The true was, oh, true from Ban. I'm guessing Ban means Bangladesh. First goal for Bangladesh. It is true. This study permit that authorizes you to work if you meet the conditions. Okay, so that's true. First goal for Bangladesh. Yeah, I was born in Bangladesh, and actually, I also have a Bangladeshi citizenship. So you have a special place in my heart. All of you do. And no discrimination here. All international. We all are international. Next one is that study permit cannot be renewed from within Canada. True or false? False, Rene. False. False, Ghana. Yeah, Emmanuel Gold. Perfectly. Study permit cannot be renewed from within Ghana is false. Study permit actually can be renewed from within Canada. Okay. So you get another extra point, Ghana. So right now, Sri Lanka 2, Ghana 3, Nigeria 1, Bangladesh 1.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to talk a lot more about kind of those conditions on your study permit. But before we get into that, it's really important to have an understanding of some key terms, which are a lot of kind of academic in nature, but really cross over into immigration policy and ties into those conditions as part of your study permit. Okay. Now, you may hear individuals at Memorial refer to an academic year. So an academic year is the calendar that the university follows, and it's different than a calendar year, which runs from January to December. An academic year at Memorial University runs from September until August, and it consists of 3 semesters. The first semester in an academic year is fall. Fall runs from September to December. Then we have our winter semester, which runs from January until April. Then we have our spring semester, and that spring semester runs from May until August. During the May to August, there is a spring semester. There's also sessions in the summer. So sessions are where you take a course and speed it up. So you actually have a lot more in-class hours during a week than you would in a semester because you complete it in half the time. So, and sessions are something that is available typically to just our undergraduate students, but in May and June, there's an intersession, and in July and August, there's a summer session. And our students at our Marine Institute in our diploma programs, they sometimes have a technical session, which happens in that May to June, okay? So an academic year runs from September to August and consists of 3 semesters, our fall, our winter, and our spring. So we are currently in the 2023 to 2024 academic year. And you'll be joining us in the spring, which is the last semester of that academic year. And in fall, we will begin a new academic year, our 2024 to 2025 academic year. The second key term here is full-time status. And what we're referring to is full-time enrollment status. So are you pursuing your studies on a full-time basis or part-time basis? So what makes you a full-time student is actually different depending on your level of study. If you are an undergraduate student, so pursuing a bachelor's or an undergraduate certificate or diploma, full-time status is defined by the number of credit hours you're enrolled in a given semester. So each course that you register for will be assigned a certain number of credit hours. And a 4-year Bachelor of Science degree, for example, is 120 credit hours to complete. Typically, each course is 3 credit hours each, but there are some courses that will have a different credit hour assigned to them. Okay, so you want to, and you can see that when you register for your courses, right, what the credit hour allotment is. For an undergraduate student, full-time is defined as a minimum of 9 credit hours, which typically means 3 courses, assuming each course has 3 credit hours apiece. Now, in order to do a 120 credit hour degree, which would be about 40 courses, it's typically done over a 4-year time span. And generally, fall and winter for an undergraduate student are your regular academic semesters, and spring is more optional or scheduled break. And we'll get into that term a little later on. Generally, the way that such a bachelor's is done is it's 40 courses over a 4-year time frame. So that would be 10 courses every year. And because the fall and winter are regular and spring is kind of, an optional semester, unless it's your first semester. So if you're admitted for spring, this one's not optional. But you would take generally 5 in the fall, 5 in the winter. That's how many students do it. But you could take 3 and 3 and still be full-time, right? Because it's a minimum of the 9 credit hours. And that can certainly be helpful for students who are starting to kind of, transition and get exposure to the academic life here at Memorial. But if you're doing 3 in the fall and 3 in the winter, you're taking longer than 4 years to do your program. And you have to always pay attention to prerequisite courses, right? And making sure that you're planning your schedule. So we'd really encourage you to kind of speak to an academic advisor there. From an immigration perspective, however, it is really important to make sure that you maintain your full-time status. So you need to know what that is. And it's also important that you make reasonable progress towards the completion of your program. So that's why you should be trying to do a 4-year degree in as close to 4 years as you can. So if you don't want to do the 5 and the 5, then maybe you take some courses in the spring, you do 3, and 2, or things like that can be worked out for our undergraduate students, okay? So full-time for an undergraduate student is a minimum of 9 credit hours. Part-time would be any credit hours below 9. Our graduate students, it's defined very differently. Okay, so graduate enrollment is not determined based on the number of courses or based on the number of credit hours you're enrolled in. You're a full-time graduate student if you're somebody who is devoting your full time to pursuing that graduate program. And that's defined as somebody who works no more than 24 hours a week. Okay, so that you're devoting the majority of your attention to your graduate studies. And you'll know if you're a full-time graduate student because you applied either to do it on a full or part-time basis. And the fee structure that you're paying is either for full-time or for part-time students, right? And most graduate programs at the master's level that are research-based are about 2 years, and our course-based master's programs, some are a year, some are 2 years, right? It's typically how that works. And you're enrolled full-time regardless of the number of courses you take, okay? And part-time is if you have requested a switch to part-time, or that's how you're pursuing your studies. But it's very important that international students be full-time, and we'll talk about that, later on. Scheduled break is number 4 here. A scheduled break is a break that is scheduled as part of your program structure. So as I explained, many of our undergraduate programs are structured in such a way that fall and winter are regular academic semesters, and spring is like an optional semester or a scheduled break. Now, for you students starting this spring isn't a scheduled break, because to be a break, you have to take a break from something, but you haven't begun your studies yet, right? So you're beginning your studies this spring. So you'll be enrolled full-time this spring. You should be enrolled full-time in the fall as well as in the winter. But if you're in one of those undergraduate programs, next spring could potentially be a break for your program. There are some undergraduate programs that are very structured in nature, where spring might not be a scheduled break for their program. And you'll know that because they would publish the program structure on their website. So for example, there's a Bachelor of Engineering program or a Bachelor of Commerce. These are like co-op programs, or a Bachelor of Nursing. They typically after year 1 or 2 are very structured. So you do like a study term and a work term. And so you'll have spring semesters, which may not be a scheduled break. So a scheduled break is scheduled by the program. It's part of the program structure. Most of our undergraduate programs will have spring as a scheduled break, as well as a midterm break. So in the middle of the semester, there's generally in the fall a couple of days where there's no classes, and in the winter, usually a week. And another scheduled break for our undergrad students would be time in between semesters. So the fall semester will end mid-December, and the winter semester will begin early January. So there's a couple of weeks there that would be a scheduled break for our undergrad students. Now, our graduate level students are very different. Our grad students actually do not have any scheduled breaks, because graduate enrollment, remember, is based on how you pursue that program of study. And once you begin your program and you become registered, that registration in your program on that full-time basis is renewed every semester, right? It rolls over. Now, you may add on to that registration if you have courses as part of your program, right? But that registration rolls over every semester. There's no break in between semesters. There's no midterm break, and spring is not an optional or scheduled break. It's required, okay? Leave of absence. So a leave of absence is where you want to take a break in your studies that would not be a scheduled break, so not part of the schedule of your program. And a leave of absence could be authorized or could be unauthorized. Authorized means it's approved or granted by the institution, okay? Now, at the graduate level, that is the only way to take a break from your studies, unless you face academic penalty like a suspension, which we'll talk about next. But because graduate enrollment rolls over every semester, you need to then, if you want to take a break from your studies, request a leave of absence through our School of Graduate Studies. Okay, so that could be an authorized gap. For our undergraduate students, you have those built-in scheduled breaks, but if you wanted to take a semester off that was not a scheduled break, there is no authorized leave. So you can't request that leave, but unless you're in like a very structured program, and sometimes in very structured programs, taking a semester off could put you behind because you might need to wait an entire year to get back into that term, into that structure. But other programs are maybe not so structured. And so if you wanted to take a winter semester off, for example, there's no process to request it. You just don't register, but you still maintain your eligibility to register in the next semester. It's only once you've been absent for 3 consecutive semesters that you would then have to reapply to the university, right? So that's how a leave of absence would work from an undergraduate and a graduate level. Now, taking a leave of absence, just like being a part-time student, can have very significant impacts on your immigration status in Canada, on your ability to remain in Canada on your study permit, on your ability to work, on your future eligibility for a post-grad work permit. So I'm, making sure you understand what these leave of absences and scheduled breaks are, because it's really important to be mindful of what the potential impacts could be if something happened and you needed to be absent from your studies. So 6 is an academic suspension. And an academic suspension generally results in a leave from your studies, and it certainly would be authorized because it's a required withdrawal from your studies. And that can happen if there's academic misconduct, right? So plagiarism and cheating are taken very seriously, or it can certainly also happen if you perform poorly academically. And generally, if you're performing poorly academically, you may have an initial warning. And then the second time, you could be required to withdraw from the institution from 2 consecutive semesters, or 3 consecutive semesters, and be required to reapply for admission. So an academic suspension is a gap from your studies that's not part of a regularly scheduled break, and can have also very significant impacts on your immigration status. So it's important to understand these terms as we go into our next kind of conversation about the conditions on your study permit, right? And what your rights and responsibilities are in terms of a study permit holder, okay? So there are a lot of things to know. Immigration policy and regulation can certainly be quite complicated. So we'll do our best to try to break it down into some manageable pieces that you need to know, I think, as a student just starting out. It's really important to understand this. And then it's also important for you to be equipped today with enough information to know when it is you need to come and speak to us, right? If things are going on in your life and you're needing to make a change, what that could mean. So first of all, this may sound very obvious that we've talked about expiry dates already, but it's really important to not let your study permit expire. Your study permit is your status document. It is what authorizes you to be in Canada. It's what authorizes you to study. It may authorize you to work. If you're in a situation where your study permit has expired and you have not made an application to extend it, you then lose your status. You are out of status. You can then no longer study. You can no longer work. And these can have very difficult and devastating impacts on you in terms of your finances, your academic progress, and perhaps your future ability, and options to remain in Canada post-graduation. So look at your study permit, know the expiry date, maybe make a habit of checking it, every semester. Is this the semester I'm going to have to extend my study permit? Memorize when that study permit is expiring. It's very important that if you need more time, you apply to extend your study permit before expiry. And if you've done that and your application's in process and your current study permit then expires, you have what's called maintain status. Because you have submitted an application, they've received it before expiry, you're in Canada, that maintain status basically allows you to keep the status you had before. So you have no interruption in that case, right, of your studies and ability to work. So that's what maintain status means. Out of status is what you don't want to have happen, as I said, right, which is letting your study permit expire and not applying to extend it before it expires. Once you're out of status, you don't have authorization to study or work, so you have to stop all of those activities. But you don't necessarily need to immediately leave Canada. If it happens, unfortunately, you will have this certain period of time where you can be here and make an application to restore your status. So if you hear us talking about a restoration of status, that's what we mean. Your study permit expired, you didn't apply to extend it, but you have this period now where you can say, hey, I went out of status, I want to restore that status, and I want to apply for a study permit. So you can then wait in Canada while that application is in process, and you can, but you have to wait until you actually physically get the study permit before you can resume your studies. So it's very important that you certainly apply to extend your study permit before it expires. Now, we have a note here in terms of that expiry date. So, of course, the expiry date is on your study permit, but it does happen sometimes that a student study permit will expire maybe in a year from now, but they've actually planned to finish their program in a couple of months, right? And Your study permit really requires that you maintain your enrollment. So for students who are finishing and completing their studies, in most cases, a study permit will become invalid the earlier of the date on the document or 90 days from completion. Okay, so this note is really for students, if you're finishing up your program, but on paper your study permit says it's valid till 2026, it most likely isn't really, because it will become invalid after 90 days, right? But you do typically have that period after you finish your studies of 90 days to be able to be in Canada, maybe attend your convocation, and perhaps apply for another document like a postgrad work permit. A second very important thing to know about your study permit is that all study permits holders are required to actively pursue their studies and maintain their enrollment. So this means a couple of things. The actively pursuing your studies piece kind of speaks to that making reasonable progress towards your program, right? You applied and were approved a study permit based on an intention to do a certain program that is of a certain duration. So you should be making every effort to try to complete that program in that typical time frame, right? That is allotted. Then the maintaining your enrollment piece, that means you need to stay as a registered student. So that means that they do not want people on study permits in Canada not studying. You can be in Canada for a period up to 150 days and not be a registered student. And that's because many programs may have a scheduled break, right? And the break typically doesn't exceed 150 days. So, those students in those undergrad programs can take, next spring as their break, and they can stay here on their study permit even though they're not registered, right? Because it's a scheduled break, it's less than 150 days. If you had to take a leave of absence that wasn't a scheduled break, being on a leave of absence doesn't mean you need to leave Canada, but if that leave is going to be more than 150 days, you can't necessarily stay in Canada on a study permit because you can't go over that 150 days not being a registered student, okay? So this condition on your study permit, being a study permit holder, those leave of absences, those academic suspensions, those scheduled breaks, they can really potentially have an impact, right? Depending on their length. So it's really important, and you have a responsibility as a study permit holder to abide by the conditions of your stay. So to maintain that enrollment and not go beyond that 150 days not being a registered student. Number 3, we've mentioned, it's really important to read the conditions on your study permit and understand them. So if you have questions, you certainly can connect with us. The last thing that's very important to know about your study permit at this point is, does my study permit authorize me to work, right? And this can be one of the more kind of complicated things. And a lot of students are very interested in working part-time while they are here as a student to earn extra income, to kind of gain that experience and build their resume. So fortunately, most of our international students are able to work a bit being a student, but there are very strict regulations. So it's very important that you understand what they are so that you don't violate them. Because if you do violate any of the conditions of your study permit, there can be very significant negative consequences. So the first thing I would say is that a study permit may authorize you to work, but you must meet the conditions, okay? And to meet the conditions, you have to have that condition listed on your study permit. So on your study permit, it must have the condition authorizes you to may work on or off campus if meeting the eligibility criteria. So there has to be some language written on your physical study permit that says you can work if you're eligible. If that's not there, you can't work, okay? And if that condition is not written there, it could be a mistake, right? And we can certainly advise you what you need to do if you don't have that condition, but you want to have that condition there. And the condition is needed in order for you to apply for a social insurance number or a SIN. And a social insurance number is not what authorizes you to work. It is your study permit and your immigration status that authorizes you to work. But a social insurance number is needed in order for you to begin work because it's about your payroll. So it's about tracking your pay so your employer can pay you, and about deducting some of the income you earn and paying it towards taxes in Canada. So social insurance number is important if you're going to be working, and you can only get a social insurance number as a study permit holder if your study permit says on it that you can work. Okay. So the first thing is it's very important that your study permit have the condition to say you can work. The second thing is that you really need to understand, okay, so it says I can work if I'm eligible. What does the if I'm eligible part mean? And that means you have to be a full-time student, right? So to be able to work, you must be a full-time student. You can work as a full-time student, you can work on limited hours on campus, but if you are in a program of study that's at least 6 months long and leads to a degree, diploma, or certificate, you're limited in the number of hours you can work off campus, which is 20 hours a week during regular academic semesters, but you may be able to work full-time during scheduled breaks. But in order to work full-time during a scheduled break, you have to be a full-time student before the break and after the break. Okay. And remember, a scheduled break is one that's scheduled as part of your program. It's not a leave of absence. It's not an academic suspension. So students on those leave of absences, whether they're authorized or unauthorized, can't work. And students on an academic suspension can't work. Okay. And our graduate students don't have any scheduled breaks, so they can't work full time. They would be limited to the 20 hours a week. Now, you may certainly have heard that over the last year and a bit, these work hours, this limit of 20 hours, has been lifted for certain eligible students. Any of our students who are coming now and beginning in the spring won't benefit from any of those previous temporary policies. They are all set to end on April 30th. But it is possible that these policies and regulations may change. Okay. So we're constantly keeping abreast of all the immigration policies and regulations, and really are in the best position, if you have questions about it, to come and connect with us, and not rely on what you might read online or what you hear from your friends, because not abiding by the conditions of your study permit and working more hours than you're allowed to can have significant kind of consequences. So, there's that point of seriousness. And now I think we need some fun. So we'll bring Arif back in.
Yes, with Arif, fun is guaranteed. It's not really true. I am not always fun. Sometimes I just look like. Anyhow, the question. First one. Undergraduate students can work full-time during their scheduled break. True or false? True, Ghana. Ghana got another score. This trophy looks like going to Ghana. No, actually, there are more chances to win the trophy. So compete. Next one. Graduate students do not have any scheduled break and as a result cannot work more than 20 hours off campus during their program study. True or false? Gerald is, Ghana. No, I think there was a yellow card, and then Blessing, Nigeria. Nigeria got another goal. That's good. Nigeria too. Yeah, graduate students do not have any scheduled break in the program. That is a key thing to know. And it has its own benefits, right? And as a result, you cannot work more than 20 hours off campus during your program study. Final, semi-final question. Part-time students are eligible to work. True or false? False. True. No, it's false. It's not correct. Keep trying. Keep trying. False. Nigeria is right. You did it right. Yeah, part-time students are not eligible to work. So that statement is false. So Sri Lanka got another 3. That's amazing. Let's try this one. Students who are on leave authorized or unauthorized, are not eligible to work on or off campus. True or false? True, Bangladesh? Yes, correct. Students who are on leave are not authorized to work. Bangladesh, another score. Excellent. So it's going really well. Sri Lanka 4, no, Sri Lanka 3, Ghana 4, Nigeria 2, Bangladesh 2. Excellent.
I really like these quizzes because I think they show really how, complicated this can be, right? Because we
Yeah.
had, different answers for the same question, but really there is only one answer. And, as you can see, I was trying my best to explain everything, but it can easily, get caught up. So it's just to make the point that if you're unsure, ask. That's what we're here for, to make sure that you have a good, strong understanding of these regulations.
Yeah, I will add to my colleague Natasha Clark. Even if you're sure, ask, because maybe your surety is not right, right? So ask.
Excellent. Yeah, very good point. All right, so far we've talked about your study permit and the fact that it can authorize you to work, right? And that work authorization that's part of your study permit is really just designed if you want to kind of just have some part-time work, get some experience, help with your finances. But there are other type of work authorizations that you may need now while you're a student, or that you might be eligible for when you finish your studies. The co-op work permit is a separate work permit that authorizes somebody to work where the work is a part of their program of study. So if you are in a program of study that includes some kind of work integrated experience, it could be called, a co-op. It might be called a work term. It might be called an internship. It could be a placement. And it could be paid. It might not be paid, right? So there are many programs of study at Memorial where there are placements that are paid, and then there are some that are not paid, like our education students or nursing students or social work students, right? Or there's other ones like our engineering students, our computer science students, or commerce students, which will have a paid placement. Whether it's paid or not paid is not the point. It is work, and it's work that is required for you to graduate and complete your program. So if you are such a student, you actually need a separate work authorization. The work authorization as part of your study permit is not designed to cover the work requirement for your program of study. So you might have, as part of your initial study permit, if you've been admitted into a program that has this work requirement, you might have applied for a co-op work permit at the same time. At which point, if you're approved for that, when you come to Canada and are issued your physical study permit, you should be issued a separate document called a co-op work permit. If it happens that that's not issued, once you're in Canada, you can apply for that co-op work permit from inside. Or perhaps you haven't yet been admitted to this program that has the work component, but you will be later on in your program. So once you get that admission, you're going to want to apply for this co-op work permit. Okay. The good thing about the co-op work permit application is that there's no cost associated with it. It's also a very simple application. It's typically an application form, copies of your passport, and a letter from your co-op coordinator that confirms that this work component is a requirement for you to graduate. So you can make that application online. It's quite simple, but it could take many months sometimes to process. So if you end up being admitted to such a program, you want to ensure that you make an application for this co-op work permit well in advance. And as I've mentioned, there is, currently some temporary policies that our new students aren't going to be able to take advantage of because they do expire at the end of April. But there can be changes to some of these regulations and the requirement for a co-op work permit. So, but as of now, it is still a requirement, and the work authorization part of your study permit isn't designed to cover these co-ops. You will need a separate co-op work permit for that.
Fun times again. Let's see. Okay, first question. To obtain a co-op work permit, you must be in a program where co-op is a mandatory part of the studies. True or false? True. Costa Rica, first goal for Costa Rica. Yes, it must be in a program, mandatory program, to be able to get a co-op work permit. First goal for Costa Rica, amazing. Um, this is one of the places I really, really want to go. The application fee for the co-op work permit is $500. True or false? False. Yes, another goal for Bangladesh is another place that I want to go because my mother lives there. Yes, it is false. One goal for Bangladesh and another goal for Costa Rica. So excellent.
All right. So as I mentioned before, there's other type of work authorizations, and there's one that you may want to apply for when you finish your studies. It's called a postgraduate work permit. So it may seem strange to be talking about it when you're first starting your studies, but I don't think so at all, because it's really important that if this is something of interest to you, if you're really hoping at the end of your studies to be able to apply for a PGWP to stay in Canada, it's really important to make sure that you complete your program in a way that will keep you eligible for a postgrad work permit. So not everybody who comes to Canada on a study permit and completes a program of study at a Canadian institution or even at Memorial University is going to be eligible for a postgrad work permit at the end of the program. There is a list of eligibility criteria that you have to meet in order to be eligible for a postgrad work permit. We've already talked about two reasons why it is important to be a full-time student throughout your program here at Memorial, right? It's important in order to make reasonable progress and finish your program on time. It's also important in order to make you eligible to work while you're here as a student. And here's another good reason. You must be continuously full-time in your program to be eligible for a postgrad work permit. There are very few exceptions to that continuous full-time enrollment. Obviously, if it's a scheduled break, it's okay. And there's a couple of others, but really they're, if you're part-time in your last semester because you only had certain credit hours to finish, and if you have an approved leave of absence that not all of our students are eligible for medical reasons and stuff like that, okay? So continuous full-time enrollment is important for the postgrad work permit. Your program of study is also important. It has to be at least an 8-month program. Now, Memorial doesn't have any programs that's less than 8 months. So, that leads towards a degree, diploma, or certificate. So that's good. But the program also has to be an in-person program. Or if it's a blended program, meaning there's some in-person courses, some online components, it has to be at least 50% in person to be eligible for a postgrad work permit. And Memorial does have many programs that are fully online. And those programs aren't eligible for postgrad work permit. We also have some programs like our Bachelor of Business Administration, for example, which you could do in person or you could do online. So because of that, when you're registering for your courses, you might see a lot of online options, right? But they're designed and they're there for students who are doing this program fully, online. So it could be tempting to kind of enroll and take some of those online courses. But it can really impact you in the end if you've taken too many of them, right? You won't be eligible for a postgrad work permit then at the end of your program. And so anytime that they're offered in person, this is the advice that IRCC gives. Take them in person. And we certainly would agree with that, particularly if your plan is to apply for a postgrad work permit. So if at any point in your studies you're not sure, are you going to be eligible, or has something happened that could potentially impact your postgrad work permit eligibility, you can attend our information sessions. You can connect with us and book an appointment. We do host these sessions throughout the year.
Hello. So again, true and false, really important aspect of your immigration journey in Canada. So post-graduation work permit is an open work permit. True or false? False. True. Sri Lanka. Yes, post-graduation work permit is actually an open work permit. So there are two different kinds of work permit: open work permit and employer-specific work permit. Post-graduation work permit is an open work permit, which means if you can change your employers without seeking permission from IRCC. Secondly, Post-graduation work permit is an one-time opportunity. True or false? False. Okay, somebody says false. True. Good. Bangladesh is quoted. Of course, if it is not false, it is true. Post-graduation work permit is indeed one-time opportunity. So if you use it for example, for your undergrad degree, then you cannot use it for your after completion of your master's per se. So it is a one-time thing. Then to obtain PGWP, student must be continuously full-time student except during their scheduled break and last semester of studies. True or false? True. Bangladesh is scoring so well. So to obtain PGWP, must be a continuously full-time student except during their scheduled break. That is true. Okay. So Bangladesh is 5, Sri Lanka 4, Ghana 4, Nigeria 2. Ooh, and Costa Rica 1.
And yeah, some of these I didn't even talk about, right? So an open work permit, as Arif explained, you don't need a job offer to apply for. So that's a very attractive thing about a postgrad work permit. But because it is so attractive, they do limit it you to one once in a lifetime. So it's important for your planning. Yeah, as you're thinking about your longer term education and immigration goals. All right, so we want to clue up here shortly before we get to lots of times for question and answer. If you have questions, about immigration, where may you go for information? There is tons of information out there. If you were to Google like work as an international student in Canada, but you really should be getting your information from these 3 places and only these 3 places. So Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, is the federal government department who is responsible for the Immigration Act, who developed the policies. And so they're the ones who are communicating their information on their website. So on their website, you should consult them for information. If somebody is reposting information, they're not IRCC, you can't trust the accuracy of that information. Now, if the information is coming from a regulated immigration consultant or lawyer who is in good standing with the regulator, right? So this is your second source of information. So myself, Arif, and Panis, we have the designation, and we're regulated by the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants. So you can search us, you can see if there has ever been a complaint, if we've ever had our license suspended, if we are in good standing or not with the college. So immigration advising in Canada is regulated, which means that it's illegal for somebody to give immigration advice unless they are a regulated consultant or they are an immigration lawyer. So it's important that, if you're seeking advice from somebody, that you have to ensure that they are a member in good standing, and you can search them on the CICC website. And then, of course, there are us. So, I have certainly told you we are regulated in good standing. If you want to check, please do so. We're all listed there. But the immigration advising team is the team at Memorial who are regulated consultants. Of course, you're going to meet some wonderful professionals at Memorial throughout your program here, academic advisors, program advisors, different faculty, different staff. But you don't want to be posing your immigration questions to them. They can't answer, right? They're not able to give that advice. And if they're providing that advice, then that is very concerning, because that is against the immigration law, in Canada. So we are the ones at the institution who are here who can help to answer those questions that you might have.
Hey, so more true and false. First one. My friends and family are the best source of information when it comes to immigration. True or false? False. Sri Lanka got it's false. They are not the best source of immigration information unless Natasha, Panis, and I are your family members. They are. You definitely should not go and seek information from your friends and family in terms of complex immigration matters, unless they are authorized to provide immigration advising, of course. Next one. It is illegal to provide immigration advice without having appropriate license and authorization. True or false? True. Excellent. Bangladesh scores it. It is illegal to provide immigration advice without having an appropriate license and authorization. So please don't do it yourself, and also do not seek this sort of advice from somebody else as well.
Right. All right. So as we've mentioned throughout your journey here at Memorial, we're there to help provide you with advice and support. And so the ways you can connect with us are to book appointments for one-on-one consultation, to email us, as well as to attend our regular information sessions. And we host these sessions, I would say, virtually online, and we do it through our course shell. So the course shell is held in Brightspace. So you will have a login to online.mun.ca. And in your login, you'll see a list of courses. So when you're enrolled in your courses, your professors will be adding you to their course shells, right? Even some courses at Memorial that are not fully online will have a course shell in Brightspace to be able to provide additional materials. We have a course there. It's not an academic course. It's called Immigration Support for International Students. And we will add our students there. So once you get enrolled in your courses, we will be adding students to the course shell shortly. So once you log in, you'll see it. We use it to deliver all our immigration sessions. So all you have to do is log in and you see the upcoming events and the different sessions that we're hosting. And you can click on the links to then join those sessions at their appropriate date and time. We do record the sessions. So if you're not able to attend them live, you can find under the online rooms, under communication, you can find the recordings. There's a calendar there, which will show kind of all of our upcoming events. And we also do have different quizzes there, right? So again, to refresh and promote the knowledge of these complicated immigration matters. And, we'll share announcements and things as necessary through that course shell. For the spring, we have appointments that students will be able to book. You'll be going through your my.mun.ca account to be able to book those appointments from May onwards once they become available. Most of the appointments are held virtually, and some of our advisors who are in the office, if you want to accommodate in-person appointments, we can. We understand that appointments can sometimes book out a week or two in advance. So weekly, we have these drop-in hours, these designated hours where you can drop in virtually and click on a WebEx link and wait to be admitted one at a time. And we do host information sessions, and we typically hold them every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 o'clock. There's a different topic, but there's always tons of times for questions. So it's another opportunity to come in and ask your questions. We have an email inbox that we jointly share and check. So if you're emailing immigration@mun.ca, you could get a reply from me one day, one from Arif or Penise another day. And we are committed to replying to our students within a business day. So another great way to kind of connect with us. Okay. Now, I don't think that we have the Q&A panel here. Oh, we do. Yeah. So we're going to stop the recording now in a moment.